All right, we are live from Occupy City Hall. I'm gonna say this. I'm still wearing these headphones, even though these headphones do not work. It's like a blanket. It's become like my comfort blanket. So anybody that tunes into this, let us know if the audio's working. Want to make sure the audio's all good. I think I said that right before the first person tuned in. Okay, we got one person tuning in, two people tuning in. I don't like to look at the viewers. I feel like that's kind of vain, but just let us know if the how the audio sounding, if the audio is good. The headphones don't work. I'm wearing them for warmth purposes, more warmth purposes than anything at this point. This is our Thursday discussion, the May 30th Alliance's Thursday discussion with Antar and Leslie. I haven't been doing lives as regularly as I have been doing a little bit earlier in the saying it's all good. Okay. As regularly as I have been doing earlier in the summer and in the spring. That has been purposeful. I've been trying to organize and getting into a routine of like having some staples every day, having specific people I talk to as guests every day, or having specific topics and things like that every day, and getting to a point of getting some of these podcasts released on a weekly basis. And so even though I know right now it's been a little bit quiet as far as the lives go, and I know that there's still been many issues that need to be addressed and should be addressed. I hope for at least these next 7 days here as we get ready to get to our year anniversary. People can be patient with us as we get to a place of starting to put out content in the lives more regularly again. So on that note, I want to say that my name is Leslie Rolfe. I'm a member of the May 30th Alliance. The May 30th Alliance is a direct action organization located in Rockford, Illinois, dedicated to the struggle to end police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice in Winnebago County. The May 30th Alliance came out to the City Hall in Rockford, Illinois, and began the occupation on October 3rd, 2020, after on October 2nd, 2020, Tyrus Jones, an unarmed black man, was shot while he was running away by Rockford Police Department Officer Dominic McNeese. Our occupation of the City Hall in Rockford, Illinois continued through the end of November, when Officer Dominic McNeese will be found to be justified in his attempted murder of Tyrus Jones, and will return back to patrol the streets in Rockford, Illinois. Our occupation will continue through January 5th, 2021, when Denzel Duvine, another unarmed black man, will be assaulted while he was handcuffed by multiple officers of the Rockford Police Department. One of those officers would include Officer Dominic McNeese, who had just months earlier been found justified in the attempted murder of Tyrus Jones. Our occupation will continue through April 10th, 2021, when Faustin Guaitigo will be murdered inside of his home by Winnebago County Sheriff Deputy Joseph Brulard. Our occupation will continue when no more than 24 hours later, Jose Gonzalez Jr. will be shot while running away by Rockford Police Department Officer Owen McGinnis. Our occupation will continue when on April 25th, 2021, Raymond Jackson would die after a high-speed pursuit took place in the streets of Rockford, Illinois, endangering all the motorists and pedestrians in the area, when a car that was being chased by the Rockford Police Department would crash into the car driven by Raymond Jackson, killing Raymond Jackson and critically injuring the children that was in the car with Raymond Jackson. Our occupation will continue through August of 2021, when the murder of Faustin Guaitigo would be ruled to be justified, and Joseph Brulard, the man who murdered Faustin Guaitigo, would be returned to duty and would go back to patrolling the streets in Winnebago County. Our occupation will continue through the middle of September, when the shooting of Jose Gonzalez Jr. will be ruled to be justified, and Owen McGinnis will return back to work to patrol the streets of this community. And as we sit here today on September 30th, we wait for the what is almost guaranteed to be justified ruling to come down in the high-speed pursuit that led to the loss of life of Raymond Jackson. And so what we want to say is justice for Raymond Jackson, justice for Jose Gonzalez Jr., justice for Faustin Guaitigo, justice for Tyrus Jones, and justice for Denzel Duvine. And we say that with the realization that there may be some people who have understanding and empathy for one of these cases or two of these cases, and does not have that understanding and empathy for all five of these cases. And so it becomes our responsibility and our duty at the point in which someone has understanding and empathy to extrapolate it out to all these cases of police police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice, and explain how each and every act of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice is directly and indirectly connected to each and every other act, and how each one of us as community members are directly and indirectly affected by acts of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. And then I'll pass it over for Antar. Antar, give an introduction to everybody as well.
Antar Baker, 40-something-year-old member of the community that has witnessed, the things, the police terrorism, in particular, mass incarceration and racial injustice in Rockford, and I'm committed to helping the May 30th Alliance achieve its objectives of combating or dealing with, or even abolishing police terrorism. I know that's or playing our part in abolishing police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. And so that we want to use these Thursday lives to continue to do that, continue with the educational service that the May 30th Alliance is providing for the community, helping to inform the community about its own narrative, the narrative of May 30th, and the narrative of the freedom movement, the rebellion, the revolutionary energy that picked up after George Floyd was killed. And that'll be a little bit about what we talk about today. But did you want to? I'll let you.
No, yeah, no, it was just a small thing. I know that you like Antar was saying. I think Antar sort of had as we've done these lives regularly. One of the things we've been in it, we've sort of just one person will sort of have a lead off topic or in general topic or in general idea of certain things, and we sort of allow the conversation to evolve from that. So I know that Antar had something specifically that he wanted to touch on. So I'll let Antar touch on that, begin that, and then I'll sort of jump in where he leaves off at with that.
Okay, so specifically what I would like for us to address, and even if feedback from people watching, we want to talk about how education, in particular, education that is transmitted in the schools, public, private, otherwise. Of course, I guess we couldn't talk about education without talking about some other ways in which people are educated in society, whether it's mass media or any society in general that informs people or teaches people things, the vital things that they're supposed to know to be productive in society or to be productive human beings. So I want to just deal with as best as we can. I was thinking this would be part one, so we could dive into specifically in certain areas or draw things out, define things, provide some some more cross references for the points that might be made today, because these topics you can only deal with them in general terms to a certain extent without drawing them out a little bit, and I don't think we're going to do that with all the points that we make today. But generally, the effect that education in Rockford in particular, school system in general, Rockford Public Schools in general, the role that they play in police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice in Rockford in particular. And before going into that, do you have any, because I know you've thought about this, the road, because a lot of people come and they talk to you about the racial injustice based on the racism in the schools. Do you have any basic thoughts on how those impact, how education and through the schools impact the three objectives?
I think that first off, that is something that has been a regularity as in the entirety of the time I've been involved in the struggle that has been going on in Rockford, Illinois, is one of the things that'll be a constant is bringing up the racism in the educational system. The first time that I heard about the People Who Cares lawsuit versus the RPS 205 school district was after March, and I was talking to somebody, and they was telling me about this lawsuit and about how Rockford was named as having one of the most segregated school systems, and I had never heard any of these things. And so I went home that night and I Googled it, and I went through newspaper articles and case law text of the People Who Cares lawsuit versus, RPS 205. And that was how I even found out the reasoning that I got to choose where I went to school at, and my mom got districted out to where she went to school at, and why kids now are returned back to being districted to where they go to school at. And so that has been a constant theme from community members coming out and voicing their piece and voicing their opinion about some of these issues, is the importance of putting some attention on the school system and in the school district and on education. And then so since that has been a constant since so early on, I've also tried as best as possible to make sure when I'm articulating these issues and when we're articulating these issues, that that's something that we bring up, not only to make sure that people understand that we know specifically the history of Rockford, Illinois, and the history of Winnebago County, but also that we see these things from a wide spectrum, and that we understand that multiple issues get us to this place. And one of those issues is education, specifically because of the fact that the educational system in Rockford has such a steep history of racism. And so with that also being said, I think that one of the other clear I don't know if similarity is the right word, but one of the other things that has also been present since the beginning of these things is speaking about the school to prison pipeline that exists. In the book The End of Policing, which was one of the first pieces of literature that I read in the beginning of me becoming more involved in this struggle, there's a chapter specifically about policing in schools and the shortcomings that police officers being in schools have and the dangers that police officers being in schools have. And for, I would say, at least the last decade in this country, the school to prison pipeline has been something that people have talked about and spoken about. I believe also in the new Jim Crow, it may be touched on a little bit. I don't think at the same sort of density that it is in the end of policing, but I do believe that it's spoken about. And so that also is a common theme that ties these things together as far as the education and then the issues of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. And so since both of those things were so early on, me reading The End of Policing and then me reading and finding out about the People Who Cares lawsuit, I've always tried to make sure that we can correlate those things together with each other. One of the things that we've done on the live here before, me and Kay had a live where we went through the People Who Cares lawsuit and the case text in it, and we went through some of the stories that were next to it and compared some of the things that were going on and tried to draw out similarities to the things that we were reading in the case law text, and then things that were going on during Brown versus Board of Education, which was supposed to be the ending of segregation in school systems, and then where we even sit at now in 2021. And so even though that's sort of a long-winded answer, I think that that's my best answer is that it has always been something that we've understood organizationally is an importance. It's always something that individually I've understood is of an importance, and so I've tried to do the best that I can to be able to cross-reference and to be able to tie that into the issues of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. And I think sometimes too, just meditating on certain things, not necessarily writing about it or articulating it, but just meditating on after somebody tells you something about the school system and why you need to put attention on the school system. A lot of times somebody may come and tell me something or come and tell us something that we should do. I'll speak for myself personally. Come and tell me something that they believe I should do or believe I should be speaking about or paying more attention to. And I do begin to pay more attention to that thing. I may not speak on it right away. I may not have any any type of, it may not be what they want to come from it, but once something has been brought to my attention and something has been brought that has some type of relevance, I try to do the job of learning about it and becoming more educated about it, so that way I can be more responsible when I do speak about it. So the education has been something, the importance of the education and the connections that education has with these issues has been a constant theme for us that we've been trying to get better and better at being able to articulate.
Yeah, and I think because May 30th put a emphasis on getting to the root causes of issues, the education of the people would be something that would be discussed, and I do remember that live where you guys dissected or went into the lawsuit a little bit. And another thing, about education, even being down here and following some of the lives, some of the exchanges on social media, and even just generally in mass media, you find out that people aren't educated about racism, or they're not really educated about police terrorism, on how severe it is, how widespread, how systematic, and how cancerous it is, or mass incarceration, or racial injustice. And I want to look at look at what is called a root cause tree tool, because like I said, we're trying to we're looking at education in order to get to the root causes of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice in America. And so this model, this tree tool, it has roots. It looks at the tree, and it talks about roots, the trunk, and the leaves. And the roots, it says, is the underlying historical, social, or economic root causes of these problems. Why do these structures or policies exist? So when you're looking at the roots of a problem, you're looking at the underlying historical, social, or economic root causes of problems. Why these structures or policies exist. And then the trunk is what structures, practices, and policies institutionalize the problems. What structures, practices, and policies institutionalize the problems. I think a lot of times you have people that come, and that's where they want to start. Right. With policies, what practices. Then you have the leaves. What problems do you see facing your community? It's unfortunate that even some are forced to look at problems from what's facing the community. What's wrong, and then let's go from there. So getting to the roots of the underlying historical, social, and economic and root causes. So to look at the history of racism in Rockford Public Schools and how that's impact where we are now as a society, where we are in terms of racism in Rockford, or racial injustice, or economic injustice, in terms of mass incarceration, as Leslie said, the school to prison pipeline. There's even some research that suggests that a lot of times you can predict whether a child is heading to prison after fourth grade based on their ability to read and reason. By fourth grade, some people say they start to count police beds and things based on school data. So when you talk about mass incarceration, you have to talk about the education of the society, or the education of the people, and particularly the education of the people that are being incarcerated the most. And so going back to a little mashup of some of the segments, the May 30th segments, I want to begin reading The Miseducation of the Negro for the Rockford reading at some point. Actually, I'll start today with just the preface, or the forward. It's either the preface or the forward. The forward, I believe it is. No, it's the preface. So the Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. This book is pretty old. Some of it may be slightly irrelevant, but you can judge for yourself when I read this. A lot of it, to me, is very relevant to what's happening in society now, and you can make some comparisons to some of the things happening in Rockford currently in terms of the school district. And since it's fall and it is back to school, the impact of the education system in schools in general, I've already started to notice. I'm hearing from sources, from parents, that there's been a lot of fights in the schools, a lot of fights over at Auburn, a lot of fights in some of the middle schools. I don't know about some of the other high schools. But we read the article on the last live, or 2 lives ago, I believe, where we talked about the 100% increase in murder rate in a certain section of Rockford. The section of Rockford in which the students go to Kennedy. The students go to West. These are the students that are going back to Auburn. Now, there was a little period where the kids were just so excited to be back at school. Children generally are excited at the start of a new school year. But now I believe that the whole excitement and romance is wearing off. And the realities of the Rockford Public Schools and the realities of the environments that some of the students are coming out of. Now, I'm not talking about the homes. I'm talking about the environments that the students are coming out of, environment in which they had 100% increase in the murder rate over a year. And so when those children walk back into those schools, how is that being dealt with? How is that trauma being dealt with? We're seeing that it's not being dealt with because it's translating into fights. I think last week Auburn had to cancel its pep assembly because of fights and things. So I want to read Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. And we'll talk a little bit about why this in particular. But the preface is not that long, so let's see. And you can stop. Please do stop me anytime when you want to. Herein are recorded not opinions, but the reflections of one who for 40 years has participated in the education of the black, brown, yellow, and white races in both hemispheres and in tropical and temperate regions. Before I go any further, Carter G. Woodson is considered the father of Black history. He's the creator of Black History Month, even though, it started off as Black History Week. And in February, I don't know if we talked about it on a live or we talked about it during one of the Rockford readings, where we talked about how Black History Month had been weaponized, in particular in Rockford, to counter protesters and the people that were standing up to say racial injustice is basically a pandemic in Rockford and the world. Well, they said, well, look at they paraded out African Americans who had advanced in city jobs or government jobs, which is directly opposed to Carter G. Woodson's intention for Black History Month. He said Black history wasn't made by individuals; it was made by great men. And so we sort of try to counter the weaponizing of Black History Month against May 30th, really, or against protesters that were saying that racial injustice needed to be dealt with. So I just wanted to let people know who Carter G. Woodson was, and that's why his words are so important, being that his Black History Month that he created almost 100 years ago is still being celebrated today. Okay. Such experience, too, has been with students in all grades from the kindergarten to the university. The author, moreover, has traveled around the world to observe not only modern school systems in various countries, but to study the special systems set up by private agencies and governments to educate the natives in their colonies and dependencies. Some of these observations, too, have been checked against more recent studies on a later tour. Discussing herein the mistakes made in the education of the Negro, the writer frankly admits that he has committed some of these errors himself. And I'm sure I have too, as in my experience of working with youth and adults in the educational capacity. And In several chapters, moreover, he specifically points out wherein he himself has strayed from the path of wisdom. This book, then, is not intended as a broadside against any particular person or class, but it is given as a corrective for methods which have not produced satisfactory results. The author does not support the once popular view that in matters of education, Negroes are rightfully subjected to the will of others on the presumption that these poor people are not large taxpayers and must be content in charitable contribution with charitable contributions to their uplift. The author takes the position that the consumer pays the tax, and as such, every individual of the social order should be given unlimited opportunity to make the most of himself. I don't know if you remember, as you guys were looking through the lawsuit, but remember that was an issue that the people that were paying property tax wanted to rescind the lawsuit because they were the ones paying the property taxes for it. And I've always said that the consumers, which is to try to say that white people are paying for the lawsuit, and so they should have a say in rescinding it, even though it wasn't their children that were directly being remedied by the lawsuit. But property tax came up as a reason why a lot of people wanted to rescind or stop the lawsuit before the 10-year period in which it could have been used as research. Okay, where was I? Such opportunity too should not be determined from without by forces set to direct the prescribed elements in a way to redound solely to the good of others, but should be determined by the makeup of the Negro himself and by what his environment requires of him. This new program of uplift, the author contends, should not be decided upon by the trial and error method in the application of devices used in dealing with others in a different situation and at another epoch. Only by careful study of the Negro himself and the life which he is forced to lead can we arrive at the proper procedure in this crisis. Read that point again. Only by careful study of the Negro himself and the life which he is forced to lead can we arrive at the proper procedure in this crisis. And that point, I think now people are calling it critical race theory, basically, or asking people to really study who black people are and how they got to the point that they are, who the students are that's showing up to your classrooms, why they are in the condition that they're in, why their communities are in the conditions that they're in. If the teachers, the administrators, and the principals don't know this, then they can't properly educate the children. And the prison to pipeline, the school to pipeline, was not really a theory. The story behind the school to prison pipeline is basically that children that aren't properly educated have a higher, more likely chance of ending up in prison. Did you?
Yeah, I want to, on that sentence there, I think that to just sort of extrapolate it out to Rockford in the sense of not only educating just like the educational system or the school system, but also when it comes to the issues of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice, I think that concept has to also be applied. The idea that you have to study the people that are specifically affected by these issues when it's time to try to figure out what the plan is going to be to deal with these issues. And in studying the people directly affected by these issues, it forces you to then study their parents and then study their grandparents and their great-grandparents. It forces you to study the neighborhood that they live in. It forces you to study the kind of educational system that they've had. It forces you to study what type of experience that they have in this society because of who they are. And I think that, and again, I know this is specifically talking about the black people and the Negro, but I think that
It gets around talking about how that miseducation.
Okay, goes every okay, and so that was one of the things I thought of, and I think that that's something that is, and then to just take it to the point of it not being simply just for education in the school system, but I think that that is one of the main issues that exists now with the current people that are in power in this city is that they don't have. Not only are they not educated about the black community or not educated about the evils that America has done for us to get to the place that we're at. They don't have a desire to become educated about it. And when you don't have that desire to become educated, when you're not educated about it, it forces you to only deal with the leaves like you're talking about, because you have to be educated to be able to go to the stump and then to be able to go to the root. If you're not educated enough to do that, then all you ever see is the leaves. You know, even when somebody else, even when you may be tagged along and in the process of going at the stump or in the process of going at the root, you don't even realize that that's what you're doing because you're not educated enough to be able to differentiate them from each other. So I think that here in Rockford, one of the things that we have found to be important is to not, and the other thing about, you know, to just go back with the metaphor with the leaves, sometimes you can get a bunch of leaves and you can feel good about yourself because now you got all these leaves that's bagged up. It look like you done something real good. Everybody look like you did a lot of work. Whereas the person who trying to attack the root of it, they still measuring and seeing how far the roots go back and what's going to be the effect once they pull the tree up, and if the roots is tied to some type of electrical cord that have been put there. So they may be putting in a deeper type of work and just as much work, if not, truthfully, even if one of them is not doing more, a deeper work is going to figuring out how to uproot the entire tree than is going to figuring out how to deal with the leaves and gather the leaves, even though initially it may seem as if the person that is gathering the leaves and dealing with the leaves has done the most of the work. And so I think that we have dealing with people who want to look as if they're dealing with these issues and want to look as if they're doing something, and so they're focused on dealing with the leaves. You know, they can give a few dollars out, they can take some pictures with people, they can say that they're listening, you know, they can put crime statistics out, and they can do all these other things, but they don't have a desire to find out why these crimes have happened in these same neighborhoods for so long. They don't have a desire to find out why these issues have perpetrated to this extent, because that is a work that is not, you know, in my opinion, that they don't get there's no appearance of the work. You know, it's nothing. It's a lot. We can do 100 lives here, and we don't know how many people specifically now know more information or understand these issues more, and we may not even know us personally how much more we've grown and evolved to understand these issues. But a time will come when we have the opportunity to apply those things and to apply that, and that may be a much longer, drawn out process that's not as flashy, as opposed to somebody who can go and put a $10,000 check next to somebody and smile and take a picture, or somebody who can go and put a bunch of T-shirts on somebody and smile and take a picture. But those things aren't getting to the problem of aren't getting to the roots of the problem. And so, to me, one of the main things I hear in that is just another form of explaining the importance of getting to the root of a problem instead of trying to deal with the surface level.
Let me see. Where was I at? Here somewhere. Right here. The mere imparting. Hold on. No, one more sentence. Only by careful study of the Negro himself and the life which he. I did read that. The mere imparting of information is not education. And I forgot. I wanted to talk just a little bit about what a definition of education, so we can, you know, I like Neely Fuller Jr.'s definition, even though it seems to be over simplistic. But Neely Fuller Jr., one of the foremost scholars on systematic racism, white supremacy, defined education as what to do and what not to do, and why. What to do, what not to do, and why. And that gets to one of the powerful points that Carter G. Woodson makes in this preface that I want to get to, where he talks about miseducation as being at the root of what we call police terrorism now. Back then, it was lynching. You know, that was a big issue, trying to stop wholesale lynching of black people in the South. Okay. The mere imparting of information is not education. Above all things, The effort must result in making a man think and do for himself, just as the Jews have done in spite of universal persecution. And this book is, I think the copyright on this book is, original copyright is like 1927 or something like that. So you're going to hear some terms and words that are probably no longer. In fact, I know Leslie likes to substitute the word Negro with black, but I'll keep it in the.
Yeah, I done kept it. I did it with. I done kept it in with the autobiography. It's too much work.
You was doing it seamlessly for, and thus estimating the results obtained from the so-called education of the Negro. The author does not go to the census figures to show the progress of the race. It may be of no importance to the race to be able to boast today of many times as many educated members as it had in 1965. If they are the wrong kind, the increase of numbers will be a disadvantage rather than an advantage. And I think we saw this with what is called the counter revolution, or the efforts to counter or water down, redirect the Black Lives Matter movement, if you will, after George Floyd. There's been a big emphasis on HBCUs, giving money to HBCUs. Even Trump gave money to HBCUs. But when you look into it, he gave money to programs to steer black people into being FBI agents, or things like that. So that, and the fact, as he said, if it's the wrong kind of education, if our people are being educated to help carry on police terrorism, even if it's unconscious or unintentional, we have to be very careful about letting our young people being directed and miseducated to become part of their own problem, and instead of a freedom education so that they can become liberators, is this big push towards HBCUs and putting more money in educating blacks. How is that addressing what happened with George Floyd? I don't know if you want to. How is education? Why did what did you notice that during
Yeah, I think that one of the things that happened because of one of the things that happened from the militancy of the movement that existed in the late 50s and throughout the 60s and the early 70s, mid 70s, is that they brought a percentage of black people, and I've sort of said this before, a percentage of black people got opted into the system as they opted out a percentage of white people to opt in a percentage of black people. And that's a simplified way of saying it. But I think that one of the things that came with that is them figuring out exactly the right buttons to push to have the opportunity to co-op movements. I feel like that they got their blueprint on co-opting movements from that time period. And then I think that, as time has went on, they've sort of perfected that co-op, mentality. And, we seen it here when, RYA, Rock for Youth activism, Rock for Youth abolitionists was around, and then the city created RYA, which was Rock for Youth in Action, and picked two random people, and they just hope that the tactic of convoluting the issue and making people not know which set of people was which set was a successful strategy for them, and I think that we've seen that's sort of the same thing that happens, when presidents, whether it be Biden with the Asian hate crime bill that he passed, or Trump with giving money out to HBCUs, they found ways to do these headline things that make it seem it's the leaves idea, to pick a little section of leaves that they can try to attack, and the people who see past the leaves will be able to understand that they're not doing nothing of substance. But we have so many people that only can see the leaves, and I think that's one of the other things that happened is that we talked about this before, how mainstream media and all of these things have become more prevalent since then, and so there's more forms of information getting, not education. But I think that, and then to sort of get to the definition of education, I think that one of the early on, I was looking at the definition of education, and one of the terms that they used that really struck me was they used the term enlightenment, a moment of enlightenment. And I think that for me, that's one of the things that I define education as is receiving information, applying the information, and then having some type of moment of enlightenment from seeing how that information that you received and try to apply, turns out, which I think is sort of the same thing as what to do and what not to do and how or why. And that's one of the, and it sort of ties back to one of the things Fred Hampton said is that he talked about how they was going to have to, it was going to have to go past more than just talking about the things. They was going to have to go out into the streets, and it's going to be more than just theorizing. It's got to be more than just making up theories. You got to go out into the streets, and you got to work with the people, and you got to apply the theory, and you got to make mistakes, and then from making the mistakes, then the right way to do things. He said it a lot more eloquently, but I think that those sort of are the same type of different ways of saying what education is. And so I think that one of the things that has happened for, in my opinion, of the co-opting of the issue of the matter for the struggle for Black lives is that people are getting information that Black life is Black capital, or people are getting information that Black life is Black property, or people are getting information that Black life is Black owned business, or people are getting information that Black life is Black education, or Black life is, and all of these different things get you to a place of quote unquote Black excellence. And then those things make your life more worthy. I think that that's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that that's rooted in this theory that they have is that these things are making it, they believe that these things make their life more worthy. And if they don't have the education, if they're not at the HBCU, if they don't have the property, if they don't have the business, then that's what makes them vulnerable to have this happen to them. And I think that is something that is, back to miseducation, because does that changes the probability of this happening to you? Yes, that's a fact. It will. Each one of the things that we've talked about here will change the probability of some of these things happening to you, but it doesn't change the possibility of these things happening to you, and it doesn't change the actuality of how many other people who look like you are still having these things happen to them as well. And so I think that all of those things are sort of encapsulated when you speak about the miseducation, and then when you speak about how getting the wrong education, and when you speak about how primarily white politicians have tried to use smoke and mirrors as a form of misinformation, which then gets applied and it turns into a miseducation.
And then you have to think about how are the young people being educated. In particular, just think, if you were to guesstimate or the level of which the schools in Rockford, the teachers in Rockford are imparting information to the students about the local movement for Black Lives in Rockford, and then just the overall movement that happened after May 30th. And you've been in communication, or May 30th has had some contact with some schools and teachers. And what is, so have you heard anything about that, or do you have any?
I think that I would say that for the teachers that we have spoken with, and the people that we have spoken with that have went on to schools and talked about some of these things, they've been people who have sort of came straight from the horse's mouth, and they have come to try to speak to us directly and figure out things directly, and even sort of plans going forward have been people who have been trying to come to us to make those plans going forward. So I would, and of course, it's one of those things where the truth, a lie gets around the world is, quicker, it's quicker than the truth or something, however they say it, double times as fast as the truth. And so I'm sure that the majority of things that exist probably in the schools around some of this is misinformation. But there are people who are doing the work of trying to get that proper information out. And I think that that's something that continues to come with time, too, that eventually, because as we do have some young people who have come out here themselves and from different age groups, from different age brackets at different periods of time. And some of them have even become educated because of the idea that because they've been put into these real world situations and they've dealt with some of the consequences themselves, and there's young people who are at City Market who more than just reading a book, they've lived out these things of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. They've watched it firsthand. They've experienced it firsthand. They've been pepper sprayed, or they've been arrested, or they've been traumatized, you know. And I think that that's something that was more prevalent the further back you go, is that it was less reading about it and less hearing about it, or less watching a documentary about it, and it was more experiencing it and dealing with it firsthand. So that would sort of just be my response to that.
Yeah, and as you said, even a lot of the young people coming down here and listening to young people having the type of mentality where, you know, you can allow young people to express this, because they can't express this to all adults. You know, because some adults will try to walk them back or make them think that what they're experiencing is not actually racism in the school. You know, we've had I've seen social media posts from high school students that wonder why Black history wasn't being taught in February or in general, or experience of basically being criminalized. The beginning of the criminalization of Black youth begins in the schools, you know. And so even now, you know, like I said, the young people coming down here talking about some of the injustices that they're experiencing in the schools, and I'm thinking, where can they take those complaints? Like, where in Rockford? What adults or what organizations, what avenues do they have to try to address those issues? It should be the school, or it should be that should be part of the education. But it says it may be of no importance to the race to be able to boast today. I read that already. The only question which concerns us here is whether these educated persons are actually equipped to face the ordeal before them, or unconsciously contribute to their own undoing by perpetuating the regime of the oppressor. And read that over. The only question which concerns us here, and he's prefacing the book, so this is one of the concerns, the major concerns of what he's talking about throughout the book. The only concern which concerns us here is whether these educated persons are actually equipped to face the ordeal before them, or unconsciously contribute to their own undoing by perpetuating the regime of the oppressor. And I have to say that this is what seems to be coming out of the colleges and universities nowadays. I don't see any H-Rap Browns. Oh, no. Let me take that back. I'm sorry. I'm pretty sure they exist. I'm pretty sure it exists. But overall, even with this emphasis on HBCUs, I haven't heard an emphasis on there being a certain curriculum, a certain education that's being imparted so that these students can overcome their oppression, or their and when I say oppression, I'm not just talking about individually you know, being able to make it in this society financially and create generational wealth and those things. They will educate you on how to do that to a certain degree. But in terms of overturning the oppression that we experience as the masses of people, I'm disappointed in what I see coming out of the universities. A lot of the young people seem to have basically gained just a step up the financial ladder. And in terms of some of them, they'll tell you they don't read, they don't know anything about, and of course that's not all of them, and it's not their fault. But we really have to look at that and deal with that. Even I know in Seattle, I was contacted. They're working on a Black Lives Matter curriculum. I don't know how that's been some of their response to the people rising up and saying that this racism and this police terrorism has to be addressed now. Herein, however, lies no argument for the oft-heard contention that education for the white man should mean one thing and for the Negro a different thing. The element of race does not enter here. It is merely a matter of exercising common sense and approaching people through their environment in order to deal with conditions as they are, rather than as you would like to see them or imagine that they are. That's as important. I kind of messed the sentence up, but that's the important part. No, I read that merely. Okay. The element of race does not enter here. It is merely a matter of exercising common sense and approaching people through their environment in order to deal with conditions as they are rather than as you would like to see them or imagine that they are. That's very important, and to know, for people that are imparting education, to know what environment that the students are coming from, where they're coming from, in order for you to really be able to prepare them to deal with that. There may be a difference in method of attack, but the principle remains the same. Highly educated, end quote, Negroes denounce persons who advocate for the Negro a sort of education different in some respects from that now given the white man. Negroes who have been so long inconvenienced and denied opportunities for development are naturally afraid of anything that sounds like discrimination. They are anxious to have anything the white man has, even if it is harmful. This sort of made me, that when I read that made me think about, I don't, want to bring up the vaccine discussion at all, but it made me think about when the media was making vaccine access, and a lot of people probably believe it is, maybe it is, but it seemed that they were trying to make vaccine access a civil rights issue, thus making black people more likely to give in to taking them by saying that black people are being denied vaccines, and that whatever is whatever. But that's what that makes me think about, and it's been other things in which rather it's the desire to become to work in a field or in a job just because no black people work there, when in actuality the job itself or the company itself is not even worthy of working for, but where was I at? Okay. The possibility of originality in the Negro, therefore, is discounted 100% to maintain a nominal equality. If the white decides to take up Mormonism, the Negroes must follow their lead. If the white neglects such a study, then the Negroes must do likewise. The author, however, does not have such an attitude. He considers the educational system as it has developed both in Europe and America, an antiquated process which does not hit the mark even in the case of the needs of the white man himself. If the white man wants to hold on to it, let him do so, but the Negro, so far as he is able, should develop and carry out a program of his own. The so-called modern education, with all its defects, however, does others so much more good than it does the Negro, because it has been worked out in conformity to the needs of those who have enslaved and oppressed weaker peoples. For example, the philosophy and ethics resulting from an educational system have justified slavery, peonage, segregation, and lynching. The oppressor has the right to exploit, to handicap, and to kill the oppressed. Negroes daily educated in the tenets of such a religion of the strong have accepted the status of the weak as divinely ordained. And during the last 3 generations of their nominal freedom, they have done practically nothing to change it. Their pouting and resolutions indulged in by a few of the race have been of little avail. No systematic effort toward change has been possible, for taught the same economics, history, philosophy, literature, and religion which have established the present code of morals, the Negro's mind has been brought under the control of his oppressor. The problem of holding the Negro down, therefore, is easily solved. When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him not to stand here or go yonder. He will find his proper place and will stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will cut one for his special benefit. His education makes it necessary. I don't know if we've ever left this place in terms of education of a people. And when I say we, I mean the masses. Not we know it's always a small group, or if we're just coming back to the point where black people in particular, their education is causing them to be more conformists. Less likely to get involved in movements for liberation. I don't know if that's always been the case or.
Well, and I'm not 100% sure about this either, but I would imagine that the further back you go, the more likely that this type of philosophy would be applied to schools because of the fact that they would be so steeped in segregation. I would imagine that the moment that even token integrationism began to be applied, that if you were to begin, it's like how he talks about how, they want anything that the white man has is the same thing that they want. And so I would imagine that as they begin to become integrated more in schools, that the same way that parents would want their kids to go to the white school, which would get them to be more into this type of mindset and less likely to be trying to change the structure as opposed to trying to exist in it, that you probably would have the effect of some of those people then going and trying to teach black kids or going and back into the community and neighborhoods with this mindset and having more opportunity inside those neighborhoods or in those communities. And so being able to then perpetuate this mindset as well, And so I would think that the closer you get to where we are at now, the more this is a reality because of the sort of the self-fulfilling prophecy of if you get and I don't want to use the word best of the best because I don't think book smart is the only type of intelligence, but let's just say you get the best of the best book smart kids, and those are the ones that you then push into the system, and those are the ones that get taught this type of education more often, then those are going to also inherently be the ones who end up having more opportunities once they're out into the real world and they have more career opportunities, and that'll also translate into education in schools. And so then you'll see them sort of sending that same mentality back to people. And then the same thing, besides the community that they're giving it to their children too. And if their children are inheriting wealth and inheriting a certain name and inheriting land, then you get to a place where the value, and I think that's just something that I try to articulate, but Dr. King articulated it perfectly towards the end of his life. But the idea that the value systems in America was something that had to be changed as well, that it wasn't just simply bringing black people and putting them into the American society. It was changing what the American society looked like at the same time as black people were getting brought into that changed society. And I think that too often people forget about the changing that the society needs to undergo, and they only think about bringing black people into that society or bringing marginalized people into that society or bringing oppressed and exploited people into that society without realizing that as long as you have an exploitative, racist, oppressive society, you can keep bringing in new people, but it's going to end up that somebody else going to have to go out. And so you're going to end up with a new version of marginalization, which is sort of, with the concept of the new Jim Crow, is that because the societal issues and the type of society we lived in and the type of systems that were happening, they weren't having the same type of push to be changed or the push for change that what they look like we're having. We just end up having a new version of what we had before. So I think that's true.
And yeah, to that point too, this sentence right here deals with the fact that, and which one of the bases of the book is that when you're taught that a people are nothing, then exploiting them is just more justifiable. Even like I said before, we had an experience, I think it was last year, City Market. A lady got out of her car and kept saying, but it's only one life. You guys are doing this for only one life. And it was sort of shocking, but even though it shouldn't be shocking, but like he said, the oppressor has the right to exploit, to handicap, and to kill the oppressed. Okay. Next paragraph. No systematic effort. Oh, I read that already. Okay, we down. The problem of holding a Negro down. We read that. You do not have to tell. Oh, we read all the way here. The same educational process which inspires and stimulates the oppressor was the thought that he is everything and has accomplished everything worthwhile. Depresses and crushes at the same time the spark of genius in the Negro by making him feel that his race does not amount to much and never will measure up to the standards of other peoples. The Negro, thus educated, is a hopeless liability of the race. The difficulty of that, the quote educated Negro end quote is compelled to live and move among his own people whom he has been taught to despise. As a rule, therefore, the quote educated Negro end quote prefers to buy his food from a white grocer because he has been taught that the Negro is not clean. It does not matter how often a Negro washes his hands, then he cannot clean them. And it does not matter how often a white man uses his hands, he cannot soil them. The educated Negro, moreover, is disciplined to take part in Negro business because he has been taught in economics that Negroes cannot operate in this particular sphere. The educated Negro, quote, educated Negro, end quote, gets less and less pleasure out of the Negro church, not on account of its primitiveness and increasing corruption, but because of his preference for the seats of, quote, righteousness, end quote, controlled by his oppressor. This has been his education, and nothing else can be expected of him. If the, quote, educated Negro, end quote, could go off and be white, he might be happy. But only a mulatto now and then can do this. The large majority of this class, then, must go through his life denouncing white people because they are trying to run away from the blacks and decrying the blacks because they are not white. I thought his famous quote that there would be no lynching if it didn't start in the classroom. That was one of the theories that I thought, even showing the relevance of that today. He's saying that if the miseducation, and not just of black people, but all people in American schools and society were not taught to despise black people or despise Asian people or despise other minorities, then they wouldn't devalue their lives at the rate that they do, or even at all. But I would more say the rate. Any thoughts on anything?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that I got out of that, because this is a book that I've read some of this book, but I lost this book. We was at a jail support. It rained. It got left out in the rain, and I lost the book. And I've been meaning to go back and read it. And so I'll definitely be taking it in every time that Antar reads and trying to analyze it. And so that's what I was doing a lot as you were going through and reading right then. Is trying to go through and analyze some of the things that you were saying, since I haven't read it before. And I think one of the main things that I took away from that is the importance of the value system and how much education plays a role in the value system that exists in the society, and how the value systems need to be altered in an effort to getting to a place where the society is offered or the society is altered because of how early on that the education comes into the play with each individual involved in the society, which also, cross-references me to some of the things that Dr. King said about how there needed to not only be a revolution of the people, but it had to be a revolution of the values that existed here. I think towards that end, when you were talking about one of the things towards the end with some of the things you were saying, one of the things that pointed out to me is Malcolm X had this speech where he talked about the house Negro and the field Negro, and he talks about how the house Negro just wanted to be next to his master, and the house Negro when the master got sick, the house Negro would feel like he was sick, and when the master, that he cared about the master more than the master cared about himself, and then he extrapolated that out to 20th century Negroes. And one of the things that he pointed out was that now you have black people that want to be the only black person working at a job, that's for them that's a bragging right, and how they wanted to be the only black person living in the neighborhood, and for them that's like a bragging right. And I grew up in a time where, Wiz Khalifa is a big rapper, famous rapper. He had an album out that was called Only Nigga in First Class, and I grew up listening to rappers, that'll be like a punchline for him to say that it's only white people live in this neighborhood, or only white people that got this kind of money, or only white people fly private or fly first class, not saying that only good people do it, not saying that only righteous people or only people who want justice do it, but only white people do it, to make it seem as if it's only white people doing it, then it must be something that's right, and I think that goes back to the concept of that he was talking about in the end of that chapter. And then I think the other thing that was it that poignant, that was sort of, you prefaced it before you began reading this, but the root causes tree tool with the roots, trunk, and the leaves. I think that's something that is it's rarely that you get a perfect analogy sometimes, but I think that's almost a perfect analogy for explaining to somebody the difference. The different type of issues and which type of people deal with certain type of issues, and the pros and cons that come with dealing each set of these issues. And I think that one of the things I sort of thought about as you were going through and reading this and trying to sort of connected to the root causes tree as well, is that if you start off with dealing with the roots, you can get to a place where you can allocate a certain amount of people to deal with the roots, and then you can get somebody else to come in and deal with the trunk. As you're dealing with the roots, now this person who understands the trunk a little bit more, who's more apt to deal with the trunk, can deal with the trunk. And then once you got people dealing with the roots and you got people dealing with the trunk, and they doing it in coordination with understanding with each other, then you can begin to have things that can deal with the leaves, because you can get to a place where all of these things are happening at one time. But I think that if you are at a place where you don't have all of these things moving at the same time, the roots is the only thing that can be happening by itself. I don't think you can address the leaves by itself. I don't think you can address the trunk by itself, but I do believe you can address the roots by itself, because of the fact that addressing the roots will lead you to being able to address the trunk and address the leaves. Whereas if you start addressing the leaves, there is nothing that says you will ever be able to understand the issues of the trunk and the issues of the root to get to that point. If you will start addressing the trunk, there's nothing that says you'll be able to understand the issues of the roots or be able to understand the issues of the leaves. But going to the roots of the problems inherently gets you to understand the trunk and the leaves, because the roots of the problem continue on. A lot of people don't understand that the roots of racism with indigenous people, you could trace the roots back 500, 600, 700 years, but it was just 2020 that they changed the name of the Washington football team. So as you trace, and Hananiga hasn't changed there, the Winnebago County Sheriff Deputies hasn't changed their logo. So when you go to tracing back the roots, the same thing with, if you start with neighborhoods, whenever somebody tells me, what about the black on black violence, or what about the murders in Chicago? If you go back and you take that neighborhood and you go to that neighborhood 200 years ago or 300 years ago, and you take your time to go all the way here, or even if you want to start here and then trace it back 200, 300 years ago, by the time you get to, once the time you go past the crack epidemic, the time you go past the manner in which they dealt with organized gangs in communities and what they originally were for, and then the things that the government did will infiltrate in them. Once you get to heroin epidemics and opioid epidemics, once you get to the draft, where in Vietnam War, when they said that black people were exponentially being drafted more than people of other races, once you get to the communities where industrialization was happening that had these dangerous factories put in their areas, once you get to redlining and all these things, you understand exactly why you got the type of shootings and the type of murders that go on in these neighborhoods. And now, once you understand that, you can start dealing with the roots, and the tracing it back will get you to the trunk and to the leaves. And so I think that those were the three most prominent things for me that stood out from not only just the reading of that, but also what you led with.
And having people start with the leaves, or sticking with the leaves, starting with the leaves, same thing. It's like that Wiz Khalifa point, but it's politically advantageous to the ruling or the oppressor to have you start with the problem, because when you start with the problem, you start with yourself, and usually you end with yourself. And that's what so-called critical race theory it addresses. And interestingly, there's a buzz in Rockford about the teachers, and rather they're going to sign a pledge to teach critical race theory or try to have critical race theory, and don't get caught up in the convoluted definitions of critical race theory like people do with Black Lives Matter and never really know what it is. Research it, find out the origins of it, and I like to summarize it by saying it's us knowing how we got to a certain place, especially in terms of race relations. What things happened to bring us to this point? If Wiz Khalifa don't know why those white people are flying first class, that's where self-hatred comes and you hurting another person like you because you think he deserve it. You know, his life is not worth much. He a thief anyway. He he a gangbanger just like me. He ain't, the police might not even investigate it anyway. You know, and that's victim blaming. You know, if you look at before the Me Too movement, they were even able to stick with the leaves in terms of the way women were being harassed and sexually exploited. They never got to the root causes or even getting to the men. They never made it to the abusers, and that's advantageous to people, like I said, that are the oppressors. Because when you get to the point where the reason why those people are in first class is because they oppress your people and other disadvantaged people because of oppression. You want to live next to oppressors? You want to fly next to oppressors? If you don't know, the reason why they're in the real history of America is that most of those people, not all, but the majority of those people are in first class because they are operating in oppressive racist systems. And that's like, I'm glad you brought up the Wiz Khalifa, because that's what our young people are dealing with. And that's what he basically talking about in this book. Show them, that they are not innately, quote, ghetto, that they are not innately without class, or black neighborhoods aren't unkempt or trashy or run down because black people are innately that way. How did it get that way? What are the circumstances that created that? And that's what we're trying to get to in Rockford. And I think for people to have empathy for Tyrus Jones, people to have empathy for Michael Sago Jr., they have to know how we got to this point that we are. Because many people, they'll tell you, well, he was a bad kid, or they were trying to do this or trying to do that, or things like that. And the reason for the lack of empathy. And so that's, getting people to have more empathy for these situations begins with giving them correct information. And I think May 30th has done that. The reading list that May 30th has put together. Just imagine trying to deal with these issues without that information. And like you said, that's what the city is trying to do. That's what the schools are trying to do. Rather they're doing it purposefully or they're doing it unconscious. Because I think some of the teachers or different people, they're not necessarily trying to stay with the leaves. They don't know. They haven't been educated. Like you said, they haven't been educated to understand that the roots deals with historical and social. What's the historical, social, and economic history of this country. And so I don't know if you want to.
No, yeah, I think that one of the things that, and I agree with that. I agree with that a bunch. As we get ready to come up on a year of the occupation, one of the things that I've been doing is analyzing. I don't want to, not using the word pros and cons, but analyzing the progress that has been made in different areas when it comes to this struggle. And I think that one of the main points of progress that I do believe has been made is putting an emphasis on the root causes of a problem and not on the surface level issue of the problem. And I think that that's sort of one of the things that not allowing and Angela Davis talked about this some in the Freedom is a Constant Struggle, but not allowing the entire movement to be based around just one specific incident of police terrorism or one specific incident of police brutality or police violence. And I do think that at the initial onset of the occupation that is what was going on, is that it was based around one specific incident. But I think that one of the things that at the very beginning that happened was that when we were here, we wanted to be productive here. And the first way that we could find to be productive here in the first 48 hours. Just a thing that we had was to get more information about what was going on and what had happened with other acts of police violence, with other acts of police-involved shootings and officer-involved shootings. And I think that the moment that we begin to add other people into it, it forces you to begin to look at the root cause, at the root issue. And I think that that's one of the things that when you walk around the memorials down here, it's one of the things that stands out is that you see that it's not an isolated event, that these things have happened to people who look drastically different. They've happened to people in drastically different age groups. They've happened to people in a variety of different years, in a variety of different manners. And I think that once you begin to, that's one of the other things I believe that gets you to the root of a problem, is when you try to inform yourself about one of the leaves of the problems, or inform yourself about the stump of the problem or the trunk of the problem in a certain way, and then you do the work of continuing to learn more about the leaves. I think that's one of the other things that maybe I would also like to add to that analogy, is that if you do the work of trying to learn about everything you can about the leaves, it naturally puts you to a place where you start to learn more about the trunk. Because now because the leaves are in different areas, you're trying to understand why this branch got leaves, why this branch don't got leaves. And that's what happens when you walk down here. When you see Logan Bell got murdered, and you try to justify by saying, okay, well, he had a BB gun, maybe this was the reason for that. And then you see Kerry Blake next to him, and maybe you say with Logan Bell, well, that was 2012. I'm sure that they've learned since then. Then you see Kerry Blake, and you see Kerry Blake was murdered in 2018, and you see that they both had mental health crisis issues. And then as you start to add these different lists of things together, it forces you to trace back, mental health crisis further back and how the city's dealt with it. When you go to Demetrius Bennett or Faustin Guaitigo or Mark Barmore, who had these cause of domestic calls that were sort of connected to the things that happened with them, and then you have to go back and you do a history of these domestic calls, and you do a history of the society that we live in. As you spoke to, this society has never done the job of adequately addressing men assaulting women in the household. People famously talk about movies at a certain time, where in the movie, the man would be beating up the wife in the movie, and that's not no type of deal or no type of big issue, or the wife is supposed to stay no matter what this man is putting her through, and so.
And the roots of those domestic problems goes to slavery.
Yeah, to slavery. Yeah, 100%. And so I think that one of the other things that I would also say is, we sort of go back and forth talking, is that if you do the job of trying to become a specialist of the leaves and know everything you can about the leaves, it naturally sort of leads you to the trunk as well. If you do the job of trying to learn everything you can about the trunk, it'll naturally lead you to the roots as well. But I think that that's different than just trying to address some of the leaves. Yeah. That's not the same thing as trying to get some of the leaves. Now, if you're trying to learn how to lead everything about the leaves, that's not
the only thing I would say, Lo. A lot of people, like, let's say the people that come down here with suggestions, I was thinking that we need to put a suggestion box, not to belittle the but most of the suggestions that I've heard start with the trunk, and that is changing policies, addressing institutionalized problems institutionally within the institution. The problem with that, what I think that stops people from going from there to the roots, if they go that way, is now you have to be willing to say that I promoted or I touted or was for a policy that now that as I'm starting to know that thing that I did was made the problem almost worse. Right. I'm not able to admit, yeah. But some people get caught in trying to defend those things. And so they don't want to deal with the historic. They'll tell you, don't nobody want to hear all that history. We don't need to read all them books and know all of that. All we know is black kids is being shot right now, and they need some role models. And that's why and like you said, some people though, they will make it through the trunk to the roots.
And I think that I think the other thing too is it's a difference between trying to and this is something that I luckily was in a position to be able to do. But it's a difference between trying to learn about the leaves and learn about the trunk, and then trying to be like, okay, we just gonna deal with the leaves. This is what we gonna, because I think the same thing for us. I think we took time to learn about some of these things before saying, what, this is how we gonna try to fix this. This is gonna get fixed this way. I think that's where you get into a place of a lot of people are, and I sort of talked to somebody about this earlier today. A lot of people are trying to use the same chemo that you would use for leukemia on bone cancer, and thinking that that's going to get the job done. And at least they know this. Look, well, at least I know I done seen some people deal with leukemia like this. They both cancers. We just going to do this the same way, without the understanding of the difference in these two different diseases. Or somebody is coming to the people that's trying to learn about the neurological system and how they can fix these neurological aneurysm or something that's going on in the brain, and they coming with them with the issues that's going on in the heart, and they saying, well, you know what, this is how we gonna deal with the heart. You need to deal with the brain the same way. And I think that a lot of times that comes from people not wanting to admit that you're gonna have to do the work of learning how the heart work and how the brain work and how the liver work and the lung work before you can get to the point of diagnosing somebody. Or you gonna have to learn about each set of these cancers before you can get to the point of realizing which cancer is in which place. And I think that's one of the things that people don't quite understand about us out here as well too, is that we've constantly been trying to do the work of learning more about the city, learning more about the history of the city, learning more about the society, and at the same time still trying to apply some of the information that we have, but never with the understanding that, all right, this is going to be the fix. Take it easy. Never with the understanding that this is going to be the fix or this is going to be the solution. And a lot of times when people begin to try to just deal with, instead of trying to learn about something, just deal with something, they get into a place of making the mistake as well. And I think that's even with the roots. I think you have to learn about the roots before you get to a place and be like, all right, we gonna deal with the root issues. This is what the action plan is. And I think that's one of the things also that I've learned with this year that's being up here is what's up. One of the things we talked about before is the importance of a program, and I think that you have to have an ideology first before you can get to a program. And I think that you have to sort of try to put that ideology into action and into practice and learn from it to build a program. But I think that is one of the things that we have began to build out here, is with the readings and even with the chalk and with the memorials and each one. Yeah, with court support as well. Each one of those things are, and they each have different facets of, and the live from the lives and the podcast, and each one of them is a different facet of not just American life, but of the human experience. The chalk is art. And I'm not a great illustrator or drawer by any means, but I've found myself trying to creatively express how I feel in the chalk and in the in the art and the colors and the scheme and the words or whatever. And I found gratification from it. And I find the same thing from watching what somebody else has done or looking at something that somebody else has done. And then the same thing with the writings. We've gotten to a place of writing these pamphlets, and that's another form of creative expression. And we got into a place of doing these lives and speaking and having dialogues, and that's another form of creative expression. And we've gotten to the point of putting the memorials up and making events, and all of these different things are different forms of creative expression. And I'm trying to get into a place of writing down, the reasons for doing each one of these things, not only for externally for the people who view them, but also internally for the person that's doing it as well. And so the main thing I'm trying to get to is that it has to be an inherent patience that you have in learning about some of these things, so that way you can deal with them the proper way without repeating the mistakes that other people have made and trying to deal with some of these things.
Okay, yeah, that made me think that I think some people, when they see if the chalk, if it had just been like plain just straight letters, right, people probably would have not been able to have empathy for it being there at all. And I'm thinking Art Scene is coming up. This is not a promotion for Art Scene, but do come and look. Hopefully they don't try to erase it, or the rain won't erase it. It's supposed to rain. It's supposed to rain. It's gonna be gone. Oh man, yeah. Come see the art here, the political art that's here at City Hall. If you're gonna be perusing downtown looking at art, come look at some of the most relevant art here. I want to do just two more things. I have I want to bring one of our great African American freedom fighters, Dr. Edward Robinson, into the conversation to emphasize, in more recent times, the point that Carter G. Woodson made, because really they sort of make the same point. But Dr. Edward Robinson, he believes that the negative perceptions and images promoted by mass media and through education and books is the reason why people don't have empathy for Black lives, is the reason why people don't believe Black Lives Matter, is the reason why people are complacent even though 35 youth on average is being killed in Chicago on the weekend, why people can still go about their regular lives when something that tragic, something that genocidal was taking place right here, or they don't think is worth spending the night at City Hall because African American youth was shot in the back while running away, or that a Hispanic youth was shot in the back while running away, or that Faustin Guetigo was murdered in his home. And so Dr. Edward Robinson, he came up with something called the African Genesis. Let me see. Dr. Robinson constructed an African Genesis theory that not only delineates the problem, but also proposes a comprehensive solution to the, quote, race problem, end quote. Robinson believes that the real problem, the virus that infects all Americans, black and white, is that the total society has been subliminally programmed by textbooks, motion pictures, and all other media to despise the ancestral value of African Americans and all other people of African descent. So both black and white people are being taught by textbooks, and we're just right now today, they're still having issues in places like Florida and Texas where the textbooks are being whitewashed. You know, slavery is being taught as a necessary good or a necessary evil or something that helped black people, because black people had came from a savage background, that their African ancestral heritage is nothing to be proud of. Anything that happened to them in America is still a step up from what they went through from where they're from. So I wanted to use that to preference. Now, knowing how important education about people is, when you talk about racism in the schools, you're also talking about teaching the wrong history about black people or the wrong history about race relations. And so I want to read, I don't know which one to go first. I got two articles. One of them is real short. And rest in power, Dr. Yvonne Sheffield. I believe she passed within the last 2 years. Now, there's a lot of controversy behind this woman's name. I'm not sitting here to be pro or con against her or to say that she was perfect as a superintendent, even though I think that she did some revolutionary things or made some revolutionary stances that trumps any negative criticism that could be made of her. But this was in the Rockford Register-Star, March, what did I say? Oh, no, December 10th, 2010. And this is a year after Mark Balmore was shot in Rockford. 2 years before 3 African-American males were murdered by the police in Rockford. This was a interesting period. But it says Sheffield issues call to reverse racism. Sheffield issues call to reverse racism. I don't think you've heard any such denouncement from a superintendent since. We haven't heard the current superintendent acknowledge the role of racism in the problems in Rockford. Superintendent Yvonne Sheffield told more than 300 community members and business leaders that the weight of changing the climate in Rockford can't fall on her shoulders. Quote, "It is not my job to reverse racism in Rockford," end quote, she said. "It is," quote, "it is all of our jobs," end quote. "Racism is one of the biggest obstacles standing in the way of success," she said in her comments at the State of the Schools luncheon Thursday, sponsored by the Rockford Chamber of Commerce. Now, Dr. Sheffield, the then superintendent, black woman, stood before 300 people, the Chamber of Commerce, and told them that racism. So it's not like they don't know what we're saying is true, or some they should, those that were around then, and to see that it's still not an agenda item. The city tried to, during this time and other times, the city tried to separate itself from the school district and say they had no jurisdiction over the schools. Her straightforward speech seemed to wake up the audience. Quote, "She's targeting some things that seem to be a distraction to the bigger issues," said Antar Forsman, president and CEO of the chamber. The article continue on a page. I don't have the section, but if you want to find it, look up the article. Is from Friday, December 10th, 2010, Rockford Register Star. But the president, the then president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, said that her bringing up racism as the root of the problems is a distraction to bigger issues. And that's what we're seeing and hearing now, that there's bigger issues than police terrorism. There are bigger issues than mass incarceration. There are bigger issues than racial discrimination. And that's not true, is what we're coming to find out. Now, I have one more article. This one is a little longer, but this one is very relevant today because it's from the Rock River Times. What was it? The week of July 10th through the 16th, 2013. 2013, a year after 3 African-American males were killed by the police. The title, it says, "Rockford Schools Superintendent Selection Draws Fire." This article is by Audrey Carpenter. He's only been on the job because this superintendent is still in place. That this is speaking of. He's still in place. He's only been on the job for a week now. But the new superintendent of Rockford Public Schools District 205 is already being questioned. Rather, he should have been chosen to lead a school system that has a high minority student body. Dr. Aaron Jarrett started his position as the new superintendent of schools July 1st. Before being voted in as school superintendent in October 2012, Jarrett was an assistant superintendent with Rockford Public Schools. Prior to that, he was principal at Hononegah Community High School in Rockton, Illinois. A lawsuit filed by a minority African-American female student who was attending the school as a sophomore back in the 2009-2010 school year states she was racially harassed repeatedly by teachers, staff, and students at Hononegah, and that Jarrett and other administrators did nothing to stop it. And just for a little cross-reference, Jamie Cox attended Hononegah. And after I'm done reading this about some of the racial history of Hononegah, you would think it's responsible that the city or the Winnebago County, the police department would really vet and be careful about hiring people who had, and as you see some of the things that were happening at the school. But it goes back to the book that I was talking about. When you're being taught the wrong history about race relations or the wrong history about black people, you end up with this situation that we're about to read about here. The lawsuit is now over, and the Hononegah school system awarded $75,000 to the minor. The student and her mother brought the suit on behalf of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which forbids intentional racial discrimination. At the July 1st Rockford City Council meeting, Pastor Melvin Brown of Kingdom Authority International Ministries of Rockford questioned the alderman about the school board's decision to hire Jarrett, stating the Rockford Public School System has a high percentage of minority students. He said he wondered why the school system would choose to hire someone with a racial discrimination lawsuit in his career as an educator. Let's be clear when we're talking about anything in Rockford. The Rockford Public Schools has as a superintendent right now someone that was sued that has a racial discrimination lawsuit in his career on his resume. And like I said, this is a year after 3 African American males were killed by the police. There were protests. There were issues, talks of racial discrimination in Rockford. 2009, it was Baltimore. And after all of that, the community thought they had got to a point where you wouldn't see such a blatant sign of negligence, ignorance, racism, incompetence to go and bring in as superintendent a man that has a racial discrimination lawsuit in his background. But this is what happened in 2013 in Rockford. So put things. This is many of the people that you see in the streets. Some of these young people. We see some young people with some serious issues walking around here all the time. Let's go back to their educational experience and start looking and putting some of these things in context. Brown spoke during the public participation portion of the city council meeting, expressing concern about the hire and whether Jarrett would be a good fit for the Rockford superintendent position. He stated the African American community in Rockford is deeply concerned about the decision to hire Jarrett in light of the former lawsuit. Racial tension has been ongoing in Rockford for years, and the hiring of Jarrett only added to that dynamic, Brown contended. The alderman did not directly respond to Brown's statements. Rockford Public School District spokesman Earl Dotson Jr., a African American, stated, quote, "This case has been in the public domain for quite some time. School board members were fully aware of it when they decided to hire Dr. Jarrett. The school board members were fully aware of this lawsuit when they decided to hire Dr. Jarrett. The case clearly states he had no knowledge or was culpable in any of the allegations brought by the suit." Now remember that the young lady said that the young lady and her mom said that Aaron Jarrett knew about this. According to the suit, there was a pervasive pattern of racial discrimination at Hononegah Community High School. At the time of the lawsuit being filed, the student was an honor roll student without any disciplinary problems throughout her academic career. At the time of the filing, 1 to 2% of the student population at the school were African American, and no African American teachers or administrators were employed at the high school. The suit states that for years, the few African American students who attended the school were harassed and that the principal, superintendent, and other administrators failed to properly address or investigate the complaints and hold people accountable. Specific actions alleged on the lawsuit are African American students being called Hano no niggas, that's exactly what it says, discriminatory graffiti in bathrooms, and one African American male student being told by a white student that, quote, he was going to be whipped, with the harassing student proceeding to remove his belt. During English class, the student who filed a lawsuit was made to perform sections of To Kill a Mockingbird that had racially insensitive language in it. She verbalized that she felt humiliated and offended and refused to further participate. In a math class, the student was being taught by a Caucasian teacher. The suit alleged the teacher discussed in class that she had previously worked at a school in Chicago where the students were predominantly African American. Allegedly, the teacher made comments about how, quote, ghetto, end quote, the students were at the school and how their names were, quote, way off, end quote. These are, like I said, these are teachers and administrators that are put in positions that are not being properly educated and don't know, quote, critical race theory. And that's a fight in Rockford that people that have suggestions or they want to do a supposedly more systematic fight. That's your fight. Right now they're fighting over whether critical race theory should be taught in schools, which is basically to teach you about race relations, the history of race relations in America, and how we got to the point that we are at now. Okay, where was I at? Okay. Okay. The student reports that the teacher made jokes about African American students and regularly cursed. She also alleges she was treated in a rude and dismissive manner when seeking assistance with algebra outside of class. She also states she was called by the name Trisha by the teacher, even though that is not her name. She stated the teacher had her She stated the teacher told her she was calling her that because she felt her name was, quote, ghetto, end quote. As a result, students began to call the student Trisha in a mocking fashion, and even after she asked the teacher to stop calling her that name, she alleges the teacher continued. In addition, during math class one day, the student asked for a clarification about a math problem being discussed on the board. She alleged the teacher said she, quote, wouldn't understand the problem because it's a white thing, end quote. Now, even though these are like extreme examples, teachers, educators that have internalized that really believe that math or high levels of math is a white domain. That was something that school counselors were on record in the people who carry a lawsuit of making those type of comments, or going so far as to counsel students out of taking high math classes based on their misconceptions about the history and the heritage of black people and of themselves, really. In addition, during math class one day, white thing. Okay, the white class allegedly laughed. The whole class allegedly laughed. The student said she was humiliated and offended by the racial interactions with the teacher. The student's mother asked for a meeting with Dr. Jarrett, who was the principal at the time. Jarrett met with the student and her mother, and the suit states that he investigated the incidents and found her allegations to be true, and that he had disciplined the math teacher, though he did not say how. The teacher remained on staff throughout and after the lawsuit. Hold on, let me read. The teacher remained on staff throughout and after the lawsuit. However, the student who filed a lawsuit was removed from the math class. She said she felt further stigmatized by that action. The student and her mother went through routine administrative hierarchy to get relief to the harassment before filing suit. They contend that throughout every step of the process, the allegations and complaints were not adequately addressed or investigated. After exhausting the internal complaint procedures of the school system and receiving no satisfaction, she ultimately filed suit. So that's who your superintendent is right now, Rockford Public Schools. That's who's educating. This is in 2013. And remember, before he even, as they were voting and putting him in place, the black African American community was going and letting them know that they felt that this was the wrong move, especially at the time that it happened. And so as we deal with the miseducation of Negro, hopefully to start reading this soon, if education is going to be directly tied to if miseducation can lead to prison, mass incarceration, miseducation can lead to criminal activity, which makes police terrorism even more of a threat. And we see the racial discrimination that takes place in education. And so with that, did you have any thoughts, Leslie, about that particular article?
It was so much. I think the main thing that I would have is I got to know more about these superintendents. This the first I've heard about the Jared dude, and I got to. Man, he might have been, and I would have been Sheffield because I graduated 2009. But I think that the main thing would be also seeing that going through and reading the civil case, the case document. I don't know if it's a way for us to get the case text of that. But I think that that's one of the other things too that has been one of the things we've been trying to elaborate or expand out to is getting some more of the case law text from some of these different things, because a lot of times in the case law, it tells you some of the things that you sort of can't get from the stories and some more of the specifics, and it gives you a wider range of it. But in general, you had told me about this before, how they hired a man who had been, basically found guilty of perpetuating racism as a principal, and then they brought him in here as the superintendent. I think you told me that happened with another position, maybe where somebody came from outside with some type of racist history. A lot of them. And then I think that with the article before that, with Dr. Sheffield speaking about specifically with the person at the end from the Chamber of Commerce talking about how she was highlighting things that they believe to be distractions. And I think that that's one of the dangers that happens when we allow people who obviously, if you're part of the Chamber of Commerce, you put finances at a very, I would think you put finances at a high premium on your belief system. And I think that if that is the what's put at a high premium, then that's going to be what that person is looking for in somebody that's the superintendent. I know that before you talked about how they wanted her to be pushing like businesses and the business model, and so I think that when you have those type of people that are sort of trying to pull the strings in one way or another, it's almost inevitable that you get to a place where miseducation is being perpetuated, because that's basically what he's advocating for is don't teach them about racism, which would be a proper education, which would be getting to the root of the issues, but instead teach them how they can open up businesses, which is perpetuating this system and buying into this system. And so I would... it's not too surprising that they would see somebody who is doing the opposite of that as sort of a threat in some type of a way and want them to be removed.
And there's still people still wiping out her legacy, and with her passing soon. Educate people about her legacy.
And so I think both of those would be like the main things that I would take away from it. And then I think in general I definitely need to read through both of those stories again. With a clear, not with a clear head or a clear mind state, but read through both of those things again, and then be able to see the full story from the R Star. When I know that we have the library thing, so we can go back and see old stories, but then also see the case text for the secondary story. And also, I think one of the things too that'll be important is getting to a point where some of these people who are involved in some of these events can also tell their stories and their experiences, and we can talk to them directly as well. So those are all the main things that I got away from those specific readings right there. But then, you got anything in closing?
Yeah, like I said, this is the environment, the educational environment that the people that are committing the so-called black-on-black crime. This is the educational environment that the police are coming from. This is the educational racist. Rockford has a super extreme. I think Dr. Sheffield, the lawsuit said that Rockford, the public schools had racism down to a science or what? Yeah. Dr. Sheffield said they advanced past having racism down to a science, and now they had racism down to an art form. And so if that's the environment that's producing our community leaders, our community members. And that's why when you see racists work inside here outside of City Hall, you know that there's evidence to back that up. Because some of the people sitting in there, working in there, the mayor or, and people that are over, that are working at the Family Peace Center, that are working at the Winnebago County Jail, that are working at Rosecrans, that are working at all these places, that are running some of these businesses, come from a racist environment where they've been taught that the things that happen to black people in terms of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial discrimination are things that they deserve or things that are needed to keep social order. So with that, like I said, we'll continue to work on the miseducation of the Negro. So we do, as Dr. Woodson said, you don't wait till Black History Month to start to, try to study or talk about black history, but you study the history of black people in America so you can deal with the oppressive systems that have to be overcome. So with that, you want to give us the outro?
Yep. It's been a crazy 48 hours. I mean, it's always a crazy time period here, but crazy 48 hours. I got to the end of my batteries towards the very end of that. But I do want to say this too before I go into this. I would thank everybody for the birthday wishes. It's very much appreciated. And don't forget that tomorrow and Saturday will be art scene. So we will be out heavy with the chalk outside of City Hall and in the downtown area. Also, tomorrow is 10 years since little Mike Sago was murdered by Winnebago County Sheriff Deputy Jeff Pope Jecky. So we want to honor and commemorate that. So we will also have a vigil outside Say Their Name Square at Lil Mike Sago's memorial as well. So please come out for that. We will, depending on what the weather is like, the weather's going to determine a lot of some of the things on Saturday and Sunday. But we're trying to get to a place of doing something on Saturday to remember the shooting of Tyrus Jones, and also doing something on Sunday to remember the 1-year anniversary of us coming out to the occupation of City Hall. And so it's just the weather will decide some of those things. So rest in power, Demetrius Bennett. Rest in power, Logan Bell. Rest in power, Kerry Blake. Rest in power, Jovan Fresco. Rest in power, Geno Washington. Rest in power, Mark Barmore. Rest in power, Philip Johnson. Rest in power, Suzette Babler. Rest in power, Faustin Guaitigo. Rest in power, Jasper Banks. Rest in power, Shannon Graves. Rest in power, Joseph McCormick. Rest in power, Eddie Patterson. Rest in power, Mikey Guzman. And rest in power, Lil Mike Sago. We outside.